getting things under control there. That seems to be on everyone's mind. So I'll turn the meeting over to you. You can take as long as you want, and then we'll open it up for questions if that's okay.
That sounds great. Chair Weibel, again, thank you. And it's great to be, I had to push OK on my screen here. Good to be with you and the Western Maryland delegation. Let me just say a word at the outset about the bridge. I was in Baltimore all day at the site of the collapsed Key Bridge, and I'm glad you opened up this session remembering the 6 construction workers we lost on the bridge. We pray for their families, and everybody's trying to make sure that we provide aid and comfort to the families who lost loved ones. I do want to applaud the first responders. They did an amazing job searching yesterday, and a very heads-up action by one of the folks at the Maryland Toll Authority on the bridge, who, when they got the sort of Mayday call from the ship just a very short time before it hit the pier, did stop traffic that was coming onto the bridge potentially, and save lives. So obviously a huge reconstruction effort. The major short midterm economic issue is the Port of Baltimore, because the ship and the debris are in the channel. There are 4 ships at port in Baltimore. There were 12 ships waiting to come in. I think all of you know that port is one of the busiest in the country, very active port on the East Coast, the biggest port for roll-on, roll-off cars in the United States of America. So, you know, the folks who work at the port, we got to find a way to make sure that they don't, you know, suffer economically from this impact, and we need to clear the channel and then, of course, build the bridge. So it was good to see Maryland United yesterday there. And
yeah,
we're also,
we do appreciate your involvement with that and staying on top of it. Obviously, the most tragic part of it is the loss of life. So we can rebuild and recover economically, but it's very tragic that the workers lost their lives. So we do pray for their families and their souls. So thank you for being involved and being on top of that issue. It's obviously very tragic for all of us in the state of Maryland.
It is. Just it's a moment where people are coming together across the state and I think across the country. I mean, I've gotten, you know, calls from my colleagues on both sides of the aisle about the need to come together and help the city and the state. So why don't I give you just a brief overview of a couple things and hit on some of the topics that you mentioned, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that I haven't covered. I do want to applaud all of you who are part of the General Assembly. Compared to the United States Congress, you are a model of efficiency. You get things done. I know you just went past the crossover date, and thank you, Chair Weibel, for mentioning Nan Mann, because she is a great ambassador for me to Western Maryland. We just passed in the Congress on a bipartisan basis effectively the budget for the current fiscal year. It's late. Our fiscal year begins October 1st, but we were glad that we got it done, because just putting last year's budget on automatic pilot doesn't recognize the emerging priorities that we face in the country. So we were able to do that. I will say that Western Maryland fared well. We were able to secure $24 million in direct project funding for all of the 5 counties that are represented in this Maryland delegation. I'm happy to go through them if anyone's interested in what was secured for their county. It included everything from a lot of fire station work to some Boys and Girls Clubs funding, nonprofit funding primarily, but also some municipal funding, for example, for water infrastructure and things like that. That funding.
Did your office put a list out for those projects?
We did.
Okay.
Nan, if you can make sure.
I'll make sure you get it, Delegate.
But,
all right, thank you.
And again, okay. Beyond that, Obviously, this included the ongoing, funding, federal funds for everything from education to healthcare to ongoing issues, Western Maryland hospitals. It also importantly included $200 million for the Appalachian Regional Commission. As you know, 3 of your 5 counties are represented there, Garrett, Allegheny, and Washington. Those funds have been very useful over the years for that region, both because they're flexible. They can be used for a lot of economic development projects, transportation projects, not huge transportation projects, but meaningful projects. And so that whole process of allocating those funds goes through that commission, and Maryland's represented, of course, on that commission. You asked about well, first, let me just say, with respect to the infrastructure bill that was passed, and you mentioned I-81. Look, Congress passed, and again, on a bipartisan basis, a very big infrastructure modernization bill. We did that over a year ago now. $8 billion over 5 years flows to the state of Maryland from that project. Those are, when you say federal funds, those federal funds are used by the state, but the state is the one that goes through the process of determining how those federal dollars are used. There are also some competitive federal funding sources. And if the state and the counties are interested in pursuing those for I-81, that's certainly something that we would partner with you and the state with. We have attempted in the past to get I-81 funds through those kind of channels. We were collectively not able to do it. But again, the monies that flow through the state, that the $8 billion over 5 years, the state of Maryland just makes the decisions on the allocations. I understand that because of cost overruns, the state pulled back on a number of projects that had been, for which those funds had been dedicated, at least partially. And I-81 was part of that. But I will leave that to all of you in the state process, because that is something that is really up to, that's when the state transportation folks, I remember they do their road show every year. That's all part of that process.
So can I ask you a question in that regard? Yeah. So is it just one bucket of transportation money that comes to the state, or is it divided up by, say, mass transit or roads and highways? Because, I mean, obviously what we're saying is the state's emphasis is on mass transit and not so much some of the rural areas where it really doesn't help us that much. So is the federal money just one pot of money that comes to the state and the state has total control over?
No. I think it comes in buckets. For example, some of those funds are dedicated to bridge projects around the state. Some are dedicated to road and highway projects. Some are mass transit projects. Some of it was broadband. And I was going to mention, there are about $267 million in the broadband build out in the state, including from Western Maryland, flowed directly from the infrastructure modernization bill that we passed at the federal level. So the answer to your question is there are buckets. Now, there is some flexibility among some of the funds for the state. My understanding is when it comes to mass transit, that at the General Assembly or the state level, funds were transferred from the general fund to the transportation fund because of the shortfall, at least this year, in the Maryland Transportation Fund, that those funds were used for transit. Obviously, the state can use its general funds and transfer them for whatever purposes it wants. But the infrastructure bill, as I mentioned, did cover the broadband build out, and we want to stay in touch with you and the delegation on how we can make sure we achieve our goal of full broadband access and build out for homes, schools, small businesses, you name it. I mean, in the 21st century, it's in my view, It's something that everybody needs, just like electricity was so important to the early 20th century. So when it comes to the border, there were also significant funds as part of what we just passed. What we just passed included funding for the Defense Department, for all the federal agencies, including Department of Homeland Security. There's significant funding in there primarily to intercept fentanyl coming across the border, and it includes more funds to track and inspect passenger vehicles. Passenger vehicles are the primary mode of getting fentanyl into the United States, and so both in terms of we need more of the screening. There are these sort of big screening machines that can better detect fentanyl in passenger vehicles and other vehicles that are flowing through. It also includes significant $59 million with respect to efforts to interdict transnational fentanyl criminal networks as we go forward. And then there are a number of other issues, $400 million for Customs and Border Protection to improve as I said, the inspection regime, but at every port of entry into the United States. Happy to talk more about that issue. There had been a bipartisan border agreement reached in the United States Senate. Unfortunately, at least from my perspective, that did not go through as part of the National Security Act that we passed a number of months ago. Finally, just looking ahead, we have the Farm Bill that's up this year. We're working to try to address that. For Maryland, it has very important programs for crop insurance for both crops, for commodity crops, but also for Maryland, we've been expanding that insurance to cover specialty crops, and it also protects and improves the dairy margin coverage program, very important to Maryland dairy farmers. So that's just a bit of an overview. When you mentioned the data centers, I know, the data centers really are not within the federal domain. This is a question for all of you at the local and state level. Happy to listen and better understand how we could be helpful in addressing concerns. But those are local issues regarding zoning. I understand there are issues with the Public Service Commission with respect to the energy required to run the data centers. But I'm happy to. I've been tracking it because it's obviously an important issue, but we at the federal level don't have any direct jurisdiction on that matter. So happy, that was sort of an overview. Thanks again for what you all do in Annapolis. And we want to work with you both on the issues that impact the state of Maryland, especially Western Maryland, but also we all, of course, share the same constituents, and we are open and have an open two-way line of communication when it comes to addressing any particular constituent concerns, Social Security, Medicare, you name it, veterans issues. Let us know because that is another important part of our work, and of course we need to work together on that. So thank you, and appreciate the chance to connect.
Sure. Well, I appreciate your briefing us on all those issues. Just a question on the federal budget. So the feds finally have passed a budget because you guys have been operating for years and years on continuing resolutions, correct?
Well, actually, in the last couple of years, we were successful at getting budgets. So this fiscal year, we were late, but we got it. Last year, we actually did. We did get a budget, and the year before we did too. So, and actually for the last about 3 or 4 years, we've been operating under normal budgets, although not always on time.
So the funding issues that come up every so often, there, even though you have a budget passed, you still have you have to pass additional legislation to keep the government open. I mean, we hear that on the news all the time. So what's that all about?
Yeah. So I should distinguish between two of your questions. We have in the Congress, we have a cumbersome process that you don't have in Annapolis. I'm not complaining about our process; it's different. You're right. Sometimes, if everything's operating totally by the book, you have passed a budget resolution that sort of frames the appropriation bills, the spending bills for the year. You're right. We've not passed a budget resolution, if that's what you're referring to. At least not recently. But the purpose primarily of those budget resolutions is to frame the spending bills. What we have at the federal level are two kinds of programs. One are mandatory programs. Those are programs that are on automatic pilot, right? Those are things like Medicare, Social Security, the programs that, provide, assured benefits to the American people under those kind of programs. So if it's a health program, retirement program, been around a long time, those are on automatic pilot. In other words, if you want to change one of those, you have to affirmatively pass a law, right? The other big part of the federal budget, though, is the annual appropriations process. So that's discretionary. That's to fund all the federal agencies. The Defense Department is the largest component of that. It's over 50% of the budget. And then if you add in Homeland Security, Veterans, and then other national security agencies, it's an even larger share of that annual budget. But that's the annual budget. If annual appropriations. If we don't pass the appropriations by the end of the fiscal year, then those government agencies that we've not passed appropriations bill do shut down. Now, so what we do, since our fiscal year ends at the end of September, in order to avoid a shutdown this year, you're right, we did pass continuing resolutions for a short term as we continue to work on the full year appropriations. Okay. So you're absolutely right. We did operate under short-term continuing resolutions. Our fear was that we would do the whole fiscal year as a continuing resolution. Fortunately, we avoided that, and that's why, for example, we were able to provide, those funding for important, projects in Western Maryland. If we'd been on a continuing resolution, just putting last year's on automatic pilot, we would not have been able to do that. So it's a complicated process, but hopefully that clears it up a little bit.
Just one more question on the budget. Any hope of ever getting the national debt under control?
Well, the president submitted a budget that does improve the national debt in the out years. As you know, it's a big challenge because we do have debates over the extent to which those savings should be achieved from cuts, as opposed to whether we should get additional revenues. There's obviously disagreement on this. The president has put forward a plan that does, shut some of the big tax loopholes that actually reward American corporations that ship jobs overseas. I agree with him that that's a bad idea. No one should have a tax incentive to do that. He wants to further improve the negotiating ability of the Medicare program to negotiate lower drug prices. We finally got that passed. So that is why, for example, at the federal level under Medicare, insulin has come down to $30 a month max under the Medicare program. And he's also now allows for negotiating with other drugs, but his budget that he just submitted would expand that even further to bring down healthcare costs and allow the Medicare program to do what any big insurance program does, which is negotiate with its vendors. But so those are just a couple of the proposals the president's advanced to bend the arc of that over time, but I'm not going to suggest that it brings it down to a level that we would all like to see.
Okay. All right, with that, I'll open it up to, since it is a meeting of the Western Maryland delegation, I'll open up to any questions by the delegation members first, and then we also have members of the general public here. If they have questions, we'll offer that to them as well. So anyone have questions, just if you could raise your hand. Looks like everyone's pretty content this morning. All right, anyone from non-members that have any questions? I'm not seeing any. Just a question on the southern border, if I could. We hear a lot about the Remain in Mexico policy, and I think there was a report on the news the other day that the president of Mexico, I don't know that it was a threat, but he basically said, if you give us so many hundreds of millions of dollars, we'll work with you to try to control the inflow of immigrants crossing the border. Is there any hope in working anything out with Mexico as far as the Remain in Mexico policy being restored?
Well, the major effort, I didn't see that report. I will look for that report. But the major effort that we've had in the United States Senate was this bipartisan negotiation I refer to. The primary Senate Republican negotiator was James Langford of Oklahoma. Very, very sincere and conservative individual. And we negotiated an agreement that would have, by all accounts, significantly addressed some of the border issues. It was endorsed by the border control leaders at the border. Unfortunately, we were not able to get the votes to proceed on that. So that's why we've tried through the appropriations process that I just mentioned to you to at least address some of the issues like fentanyl. I will have to look into what the president of Mexico said with respect to that issue.
Okay, appreciate that. Anyone else have any questions? I don't see any.
Good to be with you. Thank you for the opportunity. I know we don't agree on every issue, at least nationally, but I'm glad we're united, when it comes to trying to advance Maryland's interests. And I can assure you that I've been very focused, as Senator Cardin, on Western Maryland, and we invite applications for that annual appropriations process. You all have your process for local projects. We have a process too. It's a transparent process. We put all our requests on the internet. They're all for, I think, good public purposes, and they allow smaller organizations to be able to participate in that federal process without having to have a huge operation and grant writers and sort of folks who are professionally focused on writing grants to federal agencies. It's a way for again, worthy local organizations to submit proposals that we think have a good public purpose. And again, we vet them, we put them on the internet, they're open to scrutiny. So we would invite any of you, if you're interested in working with, they're primarily for local nonprofits, but also, as I said, for local government entities as well. So thank you, and look forward to seeing you, if not in Annapolis, in Western Maryland.
Yeah, we appreciate your time I know it's very busy for you. We appreciate you taking the time to reach out and with the dialogue with the Western Maryland delegation. And again, always appreciate the openness of your staff. I know I personally had an issue with the IRS here with my employer here the other month. It took us about 2 or 3 years, but they finally saw it our way. But your staff member was very diligent in sticking with us and getting that resolved. So we appreciate that and appreciate your time. And hopefully you have a good day, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you,
Senator.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Paul.
We appreciate you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.